NFL training camps are starting up, but what do we believe about certain players as we head in? And what is going to happen as we hear training camp reports and analysis? Is it going to change our mind? Are we going to question what we believe about these players? Let's unpack it. This is the Fantasy Football Fellowship Podcast, the show that unpacks fantasy, faith, and life. I'm Bryce Johnson, joined today by Harrison Zuckerberg. We are excited to have him a part of the show over the next couple of weeks as we take a look at the biggest stories in fantasy football as we prepare for fantasy drafts. It's that time of year. It is fun. It's exciting. We've got mock drafts. We've got, putting together leagues. You got all the scheduling of drafts. All that's happening right now. And here at Fantasy Football Fellowship, we want to come alongside of you now and all the way through the season. And so we will do that on this podcast in a weekly form. And then also, we encourage you to become a member of Fantasy Football Fellowship by going to our website, fantasyfootballfellowship.com. And membership is free. And what we want to do is help you play fantasy football with purpose. Each week, we provide breakouts on this podcast, but also in written form on our website that is designed for you and your league to discuss all season long. And so we encourage you to get together with your league, have a league meeting, and talk about our fantasy concepts and how they relate to the Bible and life. And we call these breakouts. And so that's what we want you to discuss. And we just encourage you to grow and learn and experience Jesus throughout the fantasy football season. And so don't do it alone. You can do it alone, but do it with your whole league. And so whether that's your home league or you start a league at church, check out fantasyfootballfellowship.com and become a free member today. So we're excited about that. Today on the show, we will give our thoughts. We consider ourselves more fantasy coaches, but we'll give you some analysis and our opinions on certain teams and players heading into training camp and as we prepare for drafts. But remember this, we're not always right, but we hope to be convincing. And so we'll share our takes today and look forward to doing that. Before we do that, we will begin the show with today's breakout. And so as we prepare for upcoming fantasy football drafts, we have beliefs about each player we're considering for our team. And so where do these beliefs come from? Well, for those of us that have been playing fantasy for a long time, we're looking at what they did last year, what they've done over the last few years, if they've been in the league for a while. And we have, beliefs about these players, what we think they will do this year. And we believe that their new situation, their new coach, their new quarterback is going to help them. If they're a wide receiver, it's like, I'm getting this new quarterback. Now they're going to be awesome. That's what we believe. We also might believe that they are too injury prone based on injuries in the last couple of seasons. And so we have these certain beliefs about these players, and, we factor in a number of things. But over the next few weeks, beginning with training camp, if you're like me, you get email updates, you get notifications on training camp reports. You're combing through the news. What's happening at these training camps? Maybe we see a little bit on NFL Network, but for the most part, we're reading, we're listening. Reporters and NFL analysts and fantasy analysts, they're all telling us, okay, here's what we heard, here's what we saw, and then we're listening to coaches. They're telling you and me about certain players, and oh man, what a great practice they had today, and what happens? We have to figure out, what do we believe? Do we still believe the same thing about these players, or is our mind starting to change and our beliefs starting to change based on the latest training camp report? And here's where it challenges us the most, because for me, there are a few guys already that I've got strong convictions about, guys that I can't wait to draft. Kamani Vidal with the Chargers. He's my number one guy. That's why I can't wait to draft him this year. I think he's going to be awesome. That's my belief. It's based on what I saw last year when he was at Troy. But will my belief about him change when I hear the reports that Gus Edwards is lighting it up with the first team, or that J.K. Dobbins looks good coming off the injury. And so what will that do to my belief about him? And so this will especially be true if we hear, negative headlines about a player, maybe injury concerns. This is always crazy every summer because it's inevitable that guys will get injured throughout training camp. But for the most part, these are a little pulled hammy, a little sore ankle. They take a day off because they're tired, all those things. But we have to read through all of that. But all of a sudden, I start to, it factors in what I believe about these players. And so all this is going on. And so what we'll do, and I'm guilty of this, we sort of go back and forth on what we think is true about certain players. And here's the reality. As we use fantasy concepts to relate to life and faith, we can get caught up in a similar way when it comes to our beliefs about God, especially, and how we view him, how we, what we believe to be true. And here's what affects this oftentimes: circumstances, trials, negative headlines in our lives start to, attack what we believe to be true about God. And so, how quickly do we start doubting God after, one bad week, one bad training camp report? We might say, God isn't answering my prayers the way I thought he would, so he must not care about me. So now all of a sudden we start to believe that he doesn't care. Or maybe, he can't be a good God if he allowed this to happen to me. Or how easily do we discard our beliefs when, other adversity strikes? We go, no, I don't believe that anymore. And so this is the challenge. This is the, the temptation for us. And so for us as followers of Jesus, as believers in Jesus, we have to understand that, sure, doubts may come here and there, but we have to go back to God's word. We have to go back to the truth of his character and who he is and what we know to be true based on our experience with him. But then as we grow and mature in our understanding of God's word, we understand and believe, wait, this is who he is. And this is what his word says. And I'm going to, allow that to be a firm foundation and what my convictions are based on. And so we know in fantasy, sometimes, opinions are going to change and it's understandable that we're going to have doubts about certain players. But here's the truth. God doesn't change. He's unchanging. The same God of, the Bible stories and Noah and Abraham, it's the same God that we have the ability to know and follow and experience today. And so the encouragement for us is to stand firm in our convictions about God and believe that he is a loving, good, and faithful God. And even as circumstances change, even when adversity strikes, our beliefs can remain, in him. Our faith, our hope, our belief is in him, and it remains in him because he remains the same. And so let's look at some scripture today for some encouragement. James 1:5-8, it says, if you need wisdom, ask our generous God, and he will give it to you. He will not rebuke you for asking. But when you ask him, be sure that your faith is in God alone. Do not waver, for a person with divided loyalty is as unsettled as a wave of the sea that is blown and tossed by the wind. Such people should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Their loyalty is divided between God and the world, and they are unstable in everything they do. And so the encouragement for us today is let's be stable in our beliefs. Let's not be unwavering. And so as much as we might waver the next few weeks in fantasy, when it comes to our belief and trust in God, let's remain firm again in who he is, in his character, in his truth. And when we face, the times of uncertainty, we're facing tough decisions, we're facing tough circumstances, and we need wisdom. Let's ask him. But let's ask, with confidence as these verses encourage us to do. But when you ask him, be sure that your faith is in God alone. Do not waver. And so that's, it's hard. Listen, I get it. It is hard. We are on this journey together. But man, let's be better than how we are as fantasy managers, where I don't know what to believe. I don't know what's going on. Oh, I'm wavering back and forth, back and forth. Man, we've got a God that is so worthy to be trusted. And so let's place our faith and hope in him. And when we need wisdom, when we need strength, let's go to him. And let's keep our faith in God alone. So there you go. That's this week's breakout. I hope that's encouraging to you. Continue to seek him, seek his wisdom, and let's remain our conviction strong for sure. Now, on the flip side, if you hopefully you listened to our podcast earlier this week as we talked about Moneyball, and we talked about changing our mind, but that kind of viewpoint was, there are areas of our lives where we're thinking how we used to think before we knew Jesus, and we have to change our mind, and we have to allow God to change our mind, renew our mind. And so those are the things that, our approach and our perspective in life, it should be changing to be more aligned with who God is. So that's a different topic. So I encourage you to check that podcast out as well. That's our Unpacking It podcast that we release on Tuesdays. So anyway, we got a special summer series with that show. But today, hey, our convictions of God's goodness, faithfulness, those remain strong. We don't have to change our mind on that unless we don't believe, right? That's the encouragement. Hey, change your mind to believe that. But once you experience God's goodness and faithfulness, that's what we cling to, and the character of God. So there you go. All right, I can talk about that all week, all day, but but we'll talk a little fantasy here as well. And so let's say hello to Harrison Zuckerberg, who joins me now. Harrison, great to see you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Bryce. I mean, we're so close to fantasy football actually starting to be more relevant with training camp starting. And I know everyone's been, talking about how excited they are to see the rookies and the vets back on the field. So we're getting closer, can feel it. Football is almost here.
Absolutely. And so with that, there are questions. What do I believe? I don't know what to believe. I'm wavering back and forth. And one of the big stories this week that came out was how the Atlanta Falcons are planning to use Kyle Pitts. And there is a lot of hype coming out of Atlanta. And we'll talk a little bit more about them later. I've already declared my my love for Bijan Robinson this year. I'm planning to draft him second overall. But now Kyle Pitts, with the news of him playing wide receiver, tight end, all over the field, they're going to, incorporate him. Do I believe that he's still this athletic, young, highly drafted, talented wide receiver, what we saw rookie year? Or do I believe that it's all hype? He's not going to live up to expectations kind of the way that he has the last couple of years. So that's one situation that we're facing. I don't know what to believe. What's something for you where kind of this topic of wavering?
The biggest thing for me has to be, what do I feel about the New York Jets? Because everyone in the media and fantasy football will tell you that the Jets are going to be great this year, just like they told you the Jets were going to be great last year. But I don't know, because we've seen Aaron Rodgers spend more time this offseason on the Pat McAfee show, or locked in a dark room somewhere meditating, or even debating whether he wants to run for vice president or not, than we have seen him on an actual football field. Like, he missed the mandatory mini camp over the last few weeks because he was on a trip in Egypt, and then got mad at Robert Saleh for telling the media that he was on a trip in Egypt instead of playing football. I just don't know what to believe, because the last time we saw Aaron Rodgers, he was not great. The Packers were 8-9 in his final season there. He had one of his worst seasons as a pro, and he's coming into a really terrible situation with the Jets historically, where Nathaniel Hackett, the offensive coordinator, 32nd best offense, 29th best offense in the NFL the last 2 years where he's been the coordinator. They're looking for Rodgers to come in and be the savior. And I just don't know, because we're drafting Breece Hall, and we're drafting Garrett Wilson as number one assets, first round picks in fantasy. But those are being supported by a quarterback who we haven't really seen play good football in a few years, and are on a team that we haven't seen have a winning record in the last 8 years. So if you're going to take those guys, you obviously believe in the individual talent of Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall. They've been electric so far in their young careers, but is the system around them to actually support those wide receiver 1 and RB1 seasons that we're hoping for them to have?
All right, I'm going to no, you're exactly right, and I'm out on the Jets. I don't trust them. After what we witnessed last year, I can't go there. I really can't. I'm not sure I would draft any Jets player kind of with where they're being drafted. I don't think there's anyone. I'm not interested. Maybe we'll see in training camp if maybe there's a second or third wide receiver that might create some intrigue for me, but and if they make a move, to add another player potentially, but at the moment, I don't feel convinced of any of those guys.
Talking about making a move to add another player, every other day it feels like there's some report of Aaron Rodgers saying he wants them to trade for Devontae Adams, or Devontae Adams saying he wants to play for the Jets. If Devontae Adams was suddenly thrown on this team, I don't love Garrett Wilson then as a fantasy option, especially as my number one receiver. But, Rodgers, Devontae's not on the team yet. Like, go practice with the guys that are already there and show us the good rapport that you have with Garrett Wilson. We know you and Devontae would be great if you played together, but he's not on the team. For the sake of our fantasy seasons, go put in the work with Garrett Wilson and build that same rapport with him.
Well, and how ridiculous too. Like, Aaron, you could have just played with them in Green Bay and made that work. And I know Devontae wanted to leave, and that was weird too. But why? And then why did Devontae leave if he wanted to play with Aaron? It makes no sense to me. So again, what do you believe? Oh, that they actually like each other, they want to play together. Well, then why did Adams go play with Derek Carr? And why was Rodgers always unhappy in Green Bay if he loved playing with Devontae and Alan Lazard and Randall Cobb? He loved those guys. He's got to have them with him in New York. I mean, come on, man. It's ridiculous. I did see today. It looks like Randall Cobb's finally done. So nice career for him. He's now an analyst with SEC Network. So good for him. Very cool. All right. So the one other thing that I keep wavering on is what I believe about running back handcuffs. So I mentioned on last week's show that I thought that my philosophy on that was maybe wrong. My belief about handcuffs were wrong, which means you draft a top running back, you get their backup, and then you kind of own that backfield. But I read something last night that convinced me to go back to my original conviction, which is I don't like handcuffs. I want a backup running back from another team. And so here I am waffling. What am I doing, Harrison? I'm waffling. But I think I got to stick with what I've known to be true for a long time, which is I want to load up on many running backs, and I like them from different teams because it's risky to go all in on one backfield. So I think I'm going to go back to my original conviction. So I have to bring that up today, following an article I read, Fitzsimmons on Fantasy Pros. I think he convinced me. So good for him. All right. So there you go. That's this week's breakout topic with a little fantasy twist there at the end to give a couple other thoughts. But here's our big topic that we want to get into today to dive in a little bit further is looking at teams across the league, NFL teams that have new quarterbacks. And so how do those new quarterbacks affect the fantasy weapons, the receivers, the running backs, and who are we targeting and who are we avoiding? And then also any of these new quarterbacks, do we want to target as well? And so we're looking at veteran quarterbacks that are on new teams, but then also, of course, rookie quarterbacks that we expect to have an opportunity to start this season. And some of them have already been declared starting quarterbacks day one, like Caleb Williams in Chicago, a couple more question marks in Minnesota, New England, maybe Denver. Bo Nix is probably the guy there, but a couple other question marks. And so before we do that, Harrison, give us sort of some numbers and understanding as to how teams do with new quarterbacks. What was your big revelation that you figured out?
Yeah, so when you're looking at rookie quarterbacks, obviously, if you're a fan of that NFL team, you're super excited. You've got the QB of the future. We think Jayden Daniels, Caleb Williams, Bo Nix are all going to come in and be, great long-term assets, lead their teams to Super Bowls. But in terms of fantasy, you actually really want to avoid rookie quarterbacks. When you look at rookie QBs and how it's impacted fantasy football wide receivers specifically, over the last 10 years, we've seen 29 different rookie quarterbacks start week one. Only 14 receivers attached to those 29 quarterbacks have finished as a top 30 fantasy football option, and only 5 of those guys have finished as a top 20 option. 5 guys over 10 years. And it's just really not possible for rookie QBs to have such a quick adjustment to the NFL and support elite fantasy football options. The only one who was really able to do it was Joe Burrow, who's the only QB who's been able to support 2 top 30 wide receivers in his rookie season. So looking at guys right now attached to rookie quarterbacks, DJ Moore, Terry McLaurin, Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, all 4 of those guys are being drafted as top 40 wide receivers. So if you're picking them as the 34th wide receiver, you're hoping that he finishes, as a top 30 guy. You don't really draft a guy at 35 to hope that he finishes as the 32nd best wide receiver. But historically speaking, only one of those 4 guys actually probably will return on that ADP and investment, which is interesting, specifically that 3 of them are coming from the same team. So when you look at DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, Keenan Allen, obviously we love and we're excited for Caleb Williams, the Chicago Bears, but it's just really not possible for all 3 of those guys, and even really 2 of those guys, to actually have good fantasy football seasons.
I think so. You said Joe Burrow. Where does CJ Stroud factor into that? So none of those 2 guys.
So CJ Stroud, Tank Dell, just because of injury, I believe finishes the wide receiver 37.
Gotcha. Okay.
But the only person actually finished top 30 there was Nico Collins. Yeah, Tank Dell had an incredible season, but overall, and it was a great value pick because you got him so late.
Yes. And no, so that's a great perspective. So I think that's important for us to consider, because I think the CJ Stroud hype is on our mind, and we think that, all right, rookie quarterbacks are going to come in and do exactly what he did. And I think it speaks to just how awesome he was versus, this is going to be a trend every single year. So with that said, let's look at a couple of these teams with rookie quarterbacks. And let's start with Denver. And I actually had a conversation with my brother on the way home yesterday, and he's sort of convinced that Sean Payton, he's a great coach, did a nice job in New Orleans, that Bo Nix is like the perfect guy for him, and that Bo Nix could actually come in right away and play pretty well, and the Broncos will be a surprise team this year. And again, what do we believe? Do we believe that could be, that's a possibility? I could see that panning out. I'm probably a little hesitant about the Broncos. I definitely wouldn't draft Bo Nix unless maybe a flyer with the last round. But the position that I'm intrigued by is the running back position, because Javonte Williams, there are reasons to believe that he's a legit runner. We've seen glimpses of that he could be a starting caliber running back. We just haven't seen it real consistently. There's been the injury concern kind of early in his career. And then the guys behind him are also very good. Samaje Perine is a legit backup. Will he make the roster, or does it make sense to save a little money on him and send him somewhere else, which then opens up the door for Jaleel McLaughlin, who I really like, because he was awesome coming out of the gate last year. I think it was a preseason darling or a training camp darling. He had some hype coming in, and then he only got like a few games where he got legit opportunity, but he was awesome. And then Javonte Williams was more of the guy last year. So I went into this season thinking, Jaleel McLaughlin, this is going to be a good running back. He's got an opportunity in Denver. And then what do? They spent a decent draft pick on this another running back, Audric Esteem. I don't know a ton about him, but he's gaining a little bit of hype too. So anyway, so in Denver, Bo Nix is the rookie quarterback. I'd focus more on the running backs if that's my approach this year. What about for you, Harrison? And are you intrigued by Cortland Sutton or even Marvin Mims? He was a rookie last year with Denver.
Yeah, so I think Marvin Mims is the guy that I'm most intrigued by in that offense, just because we saw flashes, exactly, like Javonte Williams. But again, it's hard to make a bet that if any guy is going to finish as a top 30 wide receiver of these guys attached to rookie QBs, that Marvin Mims would be the one to do it over DJ Moore or over Keenan Allen. And you just look at last year, the Denver Broncos offense, like it or not, Sean Payton really doesn't care about a wide receiver depth chart, and they rotated guys through like every other play. It felt like there were 7 different wide receivers getting targets during the game. Tim Patrick is back from injury, even though he's been out for like the last 3 seasons. He still finds himself on the roster. Speaking of Cortland Sutton, that's a guy who, was productive last year, but still wasn't even an elite fantasy option, despite the fact that he caught 10 passing touchdowns, which is, absurd for a wide receiver to catch 10 passing touchdowns. And you're not a top 30 guy. You don't finish as a wide receiver 3 on the season. So if the Broncos, maybe, I mean, I honestly think it's going to be a step back from Russell Wilson because Russ was pretty good last year. And we'll talk about him going to the Steelers, but Russ was surprisingly top 10 in a lot of different quarterback metrics. For fantasy, it wasn't great, but is Bo Nix going to be able to replicate that efficiency and then support other weapons? I'm just not really sure. I think I'm pretty much out on the Denver Broncos for this upcoming season.
Interesting. All right. There you go. Also, if Cortland Sutton gets traded, that rumor has been out there. I don't know if it's legit, but of course, Jerry Jeudy traded to the Browns. So he's out of there. So who becomes the number 2? They brought in Josh Reynolds from Detroit, who's sort of a nice, receiver, complimentary veteran guy. He had moments of fantasy relevance, but not really.
But he's the type of guy where you're going to be annoyed that he gets 3 catches for 30 yards and a touchdown because he's cycled in through the game rather than, Marvin Mims or someone else getting that, goal line target.
Yeah. And then their tight end position, not great. Adam Troutman, Greg Dulcich, who we want to love. We thought that he got injured last year.
We thought he was going to be great because, great talent. But again, I just don't think the situations is there for him this year to excel in fantasy.
Nope. So, all right. So the Broncos have a new quarterback. Jarrett Stidham is still there. I'm guessing Nix will be the guy. But if Stidham is there, then, well, he finished the season when they benched Russell Wilson. All right. So you talked a little bit about the Bears. Anything to add there? Of course, Caleb Williams, the rookie there. I think I've mentioned it already on the show, but to hit it again, my favorite of these 3 guys, they're 3 wide receivers, which are all studs, right? You got Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, and Rome Odunze. I like Rome Odunze. And so that's who I'll probably be targeting in drafts, but it's one of those things I'll probably have to be patient with him. And it's also sort of believing that maybe this is the year Keenan Allen just he falls off and now he's with a new team. Maybe it doesn't work out for him and Rome becomes the guy with a fellow rookie that Rome and Caleb Williams. That's the connection. That's kind of what I'm buying there. But in general, to your point about, man, it's unlikely that all 3 guys are going to be studs. So is there one that you buy into more than the others?
I think I would probably buy into Rome of the 3 just because he's going the latest of the 3. I don't feel comfortable spending, a 4th round pick on DJ Moore based off of what I just said. And Keenan Allen, while he's great, you look at Caleb Williams' play style in college. A lot of scrambling around, extending the play, trying to take a big shot downfield. He's not really a fan of the check down, which Keenan Allen in the slot probably doing a lot of that role in the Chicago Bears offense. I think you're going to find a lot of weeks Keenan only has like 4 receptions for 50 yards. And unless he's catching a touchdown, it's just not a great week fantasy for him. Whereas Rome and DJ Moore are going to be the guys flying down the field. And whether it's good for the team or not, Caleb Williams is going to be trying to air it out and hit them deep early on. I think as the season progresses, the Bears become a lot more interesting because Caleb's going to sort of settle down a little bit, not try to play as much hero ball. The NFL will slow down. I think he'll become more of a field general, distribute the ball QB. So late in the season, if Bears players don't start too strong and you can maybe trade for them, I think they'll be great assets for the playoffs. But of those 3, I definitely think Rome would be the one to target in drafts.
Okay, so we're in agreement there. Interesting. All right, let's combine 2 teams. I find them, well, maybe I'm wrong in combining them, but we'll talk about the Vikings and the Patriots. And the reason for combining them is that Sam Darnold, sort of a journeyman, he's shown glimpses. He was, what was he, a 3rd pick by the Jets. He had like a couple good games here in Charlotte for the Panthers. And then he goes to San Francisco last year and has a little bit of hype going to Minnesota, which is weird. But so you got him, and then you've got JJ McCarthy. And of course, they lost Kirk Cousins to the Falcons, which we'll talk about the Falcons too. But you have this veteran guy, Sam Darnold, with the young guy, JJ McCarthy. And then in New England, you have Jacoby Brissett, who, he's never been awesome, but he's been like a solid starter. Okay, fine. Not real fantasy relevant, but can at least make a receiver good here and there. Had his moments with the Colts and different teams. He's bounced around to a number of spots. But do you like any of the weapons in New England or Minnesota based on, some question marks with, okay, will it be the rookie? Will it be the veteran? The ceiling that both these veteran guys have. Drake Maye. I always like Luke Maye, former basketball player, but his brother, Drake Maye, I think he's got, a much higher ceiling than Jacoby Brissett, but will he hit that ceiling this year? That's unlikely. And of all the kind of weapons on both these teams, I actually like Ramondre Stevenson. And at the moment, he's been discounted a little bit because he got injured at the end of last year. New England was horrible at the end of last year, all last year. But Stevenson's still pretty good. They gave him a big contract. So of both teams, that's the guy that I like. What about for you?
Yeah. So looking at both of those teams, New England pass catchers wise, I know like Hunter Henry's still there. There's a couple of rookie young wide receivers. Juju Smith-Schuster, I think, is somehow still on the roster there.
Is he still in
Which
the NFL?
I don't know, but
Gosh.
there either way, there is no one that I want pass catching wise from the New England Patriots. I mean, we look at Jacoby Brissett's, starts throughout his career. He only averages 208 passing yards and barely one passing touchdown per game. That's not numbers that I want to invest in his wide receiver one. In addition to that, Las Vegas projects that they will be the worst NFL offense this year in terms of points scored. That's also not something that I want to be investing in fantasy football. Ramondre Stevenson is interesting because he obviously has had the workload in the past, has the talent. They extend him with a big time contract. The only thing for him I would look out for is they did bring in Antonio Gibson to be like a third down, pass catching running back, which is an area of Ramondre Stevenson's game that's been so important for fantasy. But he's even said over the last couple of years, hey, I'd prefer it a little bit more if I was more, first and second down, not playing as many third down, just so I can get sort of a breather. So we should see during training camp, how much is Antonio Gibson actually on the field? Because if Antonio Gibson takes away a lot of third down and receiving work from Ramondre Stevenson, I don't know what his upside really is in fantasy then. He could still be solid, but if you're not going to be a great offense scoring a lot of touchdowns, you need that to score highly for a running back. And if you're not going to get a lot of receptions, then I don't really know where the upside is for Ramondre. And then with the Vikings, Justin Jefferson is the only person there who I think is worth looking at, but I think he's going way too high as a first round pick right now. Maybe back end of the first, early second would be good value for him, but everyone else there I don't think is going to perform well.
Yeah, I've made it clear I'm not willing to spend a top 5 pick on Jefferson. Now, the talent alone, we know what he can do. He's unbelievable, and he's so good that even bad quarterback play he'll still put up great numbers. Mm-hmm. But when you spend a first round pick, I mean, you need big numbers every week. That's right. What you're counting on. And with the question mark at quarterback, that's a hard commitment there. It really is. When you could take Jamar Chase, and I guess you're taking a little bit of a risk with Joe Burrow coming back from injury, but I feel much better. I'm taking Chase. So who go down the list?
Realistically, who would you trust more though? Once you get past that Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, who do you trust more at quarterback? Sam Darnold with Justin Jefferson, Gardner Minshew or Aiden O'Connell with Devontae Adams, or Aaron Rodgers with Garrett Wilson? That's kind of the question that you're asking yourself once you get to the back. I guess you could throw A.J. Brown in there with Jalen Hurts as another guy there with a solid QB. But that back end of the first, you got 3 fantastic wide receiver talents, and we don't really know what's going to happen at QB.
That's a good point. That's why in that area, I'm probably going running back. I'm taking Jahmyr Gibbs. I'm taking Jonathan Taylor. That's probably who I'm targeting in those draft picks, kind of mid to late first round. So there's a little hint on my my draft strategy there. I'm a running back guy, as you know. So sometimes I'll pass on the big time receivers and look for value at the receiver spot a little bit later in that second, third round. So then there's some interesting. There's Devontae Smith there, those kind of guys a little bit later. So, all right. So there you go. There's the Vikings and the Patriots. Other teams with new quarterbacks. I mentioned the Falcons, of course, with Kirk Cousins. I'm in on Bijan. Drake London, I would like to get him a little bit later than he's going right now. There's some level of hesitation. Like we've seen some talent there, but I'm like, does he have the high end talent? I'm not totally sold yet to again spend that top pick on him. He's going fairly early in the second round. And then the Pitts, like I said earlier, I don't know what to believe. I want to believe in Pitts, but I think he's going as a tight end 6. And he could be a tight end 3, maybe like a top 3 tight end potentially if things all click in Atlanta. So that's interesting. And then as far as Cousins goes, we assume that he'll be the starter over Michael Penix Jr. And he's coming off this Achilles injury. I'm not interested in drafting him. No, thank you. There are other guys that I would prefer later in the draft. Now, the last couple of years, Cousins has been that nice late round guy that you can get starter quality fantasy production out of because he was playing with Justin Jefferson, right? And so Cousins is solid. Jefferson took him to another level, which then parlayed into a monster payday in Atlanta, despite an Achilles injury. What was Atlanta thinking? That's part of the question there. But my whole thing is hand the ball off to Bijan, dump it off to Bijan. That's who I think is going to be the focal point of this offense, the star of this offense, the fantasy, that's who you want. That's who you want in fantasy. So do you have any thoughts on the Falcons and Kirk Cousins?
Yeah, I think the Falcons, if you're investing in their weapons, works either way because whether it's Kirk Cousins, Michael Penix, it's not like a Jet situation from last year where veteran QB comes in, gets injured, no one's behind him. You have a top 10 draft pick at QB who was
What do you mean they had
Harrison?
They had Zach Wilson. What are you talking about? He's a top 10 quarterback. We already knew he was bad. We already knew it. Michael Penix, there's at least hope as a top 10 pick.
Yeah. And Michael Penix was competing in a national championship on one of the best offenses in the country. Not any shade against BYU, but Zach Wilson's college production was not nearly what Michael Penix's was. But I think Pitts, London, Bijan, those 3 guys are really all that you want there. I don't really think you want to draft, any of the Rondell Moores and Darnell Mooney's that they brought in as auxiliary pieces. I don't think they're going to be that great. But talking about Atlanta, the hesitation with Bijan was last year he was tied to Arthur Smith, which was terrible for him because he rotated through running backs so much. The team that's now tied to Arthur Smith is the Pittsburgh Steelers, another team with a new QB, Russell Wilson. Mentioned it before. Are you interested in any of the options on the Pittsburgh Steelers? George Pickens is a guy that I'm really excited in because he was fantastic as a rookie. Last year I was super high on him because the things he did as a rookie were things that only guys like DeAndre Hopkins, AJ Brown, T.Y. Hilton did in their rookie seasons. He had an even better sophomore season. Now Deontay Johnson's gone. QB upgrade. I think he's ready for a huge top 20 breakout wide receiver season in year 3. But what do you think about the rest of the weapons there? Najee Harris, Jalen Warren, Pat Freiermuth is still there at tight end.
I love Muth. Love him. He's good to draft as a second tight end. But we talked about earlier. It's like, what do we believe? What do we believe about the Steelers? All right, here's what I believe about the Steelers. I love Mike Tomlin. I think he's a great coach, and I think that he will. I have the feeling that either Wilson or Fields will end up having a good year. But who's it going to be? Is it truly going to be Wilson? Or will Fields somehow emerge and be the guy? So there's some even questioning with that. But I can't see the Steelers. They always are in the mix. So it's like they're always a good team. So that it's worth considering from a fantasy perspective, just because they're just that solid franchise that you can trust. So there's that belief there. Now, I'm a big believer in Jalen Warren. I like Warren. I will keep him in one of my leagues as a keeper. I have another league that I'm gonna pick someone else instead of him as a keeper. But I've been in on him, and I like him better than Najee. But the rest of the fantasy community also is in on Warren, and so you have to pay the price for him a little bit. And so there's some level of pause because, to your point about Arthur Smith, he's going to use both those guys.
Right?
Is Warren really going to pass Najee? Even though we wonder about his contract and maybe the Steelers were even trying to trade him. So there's a lot of questions there, but I'm in agreement with you. Pickens is talented. He's a high-end, talented wide receiver. And so whoever lands at quarterback, they're going to be finding him. He's the guy. And as much as I didn't like last year, what happened to him at the end of the season where he didn't block or something, I kind of was like, forget Pickens. And you know what I did? I benched Pickens that game that he dropped 40 points. That was one of the dumbest fantasy decisions I've ever made in 20 years of playing. He cost me, but I'm going to let that go. I'm going to forgive him. We'll do that on one of our episodes coming up, but a little teaser there. I'm going to forgive Pickens because, yeah, I'm with you. As annoying as Arthur Smith was in Atlanta as the head coach, he was a good coordinator with the Titans.
He was great in Tennessee. I mean, A.J. Brown, Derrick Henry.
Yeah. So there's you got to kind of convince yourself there. But of all these teams we're talking about, I think the Steelers have the best shot at being a playoff contender in the mix. Games matter down the stretch, which means our fantasy matchups matter with a guy like Pickens and Warren type of thing. I think they also improve their offensive line, which should help as well. And then again, Freiermuth as a tight end too. I like him. All right, let's see. Any other teams we need to discuss? We'll do the Raiders real quickly, and then we'll wrap up with Washington. So the Raiders, I think we talked a little bit about them last week. So I always love Gardner Minshew. He's fun, but he's not going to light it up. But I like Jacoby Myers last year, and so I will like him again this year as somebody who I still think is good value. Even though, last year he was good. He had some really strong games playing next to Davante Adams, and I think he surprised a lot of people. Not me, because I was all in on him. But I think there's still a level of hesitation with the Raiders that you can get Myers at somewhat of a discount. And let's say things unravel for the Raiders. Now, in the NFL, even when things unravel, there's still fantasy production to be had. So if things unravel in Las Vegas, which I think it could, they're going to trade Davante. He's a trading chip. And they're in a tough division because let's just say it plays out to where Denver's good, better. Jim Harbaugh works out with the Chargers, and then, of course, the Chiefs. The Raiders are sitting there with one win in week 6, 7, and they look around and go, all right, we got to trade Davante. So anyway, my point is Jacoby Myers is worth having. And then also I do like Zamir White as a value. And again, I'm more so keeping him because I picked him up late last season when he really burst out. So I get good value to keep him. But I still think he's worth drafting in a redraft league as well, because he should be the guy. Alexander Madison is just average. And so I think Zamir, the Raiders aren't awesome. They're going to be a bad team, but they still have to at least try to put some points on the board, right?
I mean, I would agree with you because they're going to be bad, but there are weapons there that we like. And the fantasy community actually loves the Raiders a lot more than you would expect. Yeah, Davante Adams, Jacoby Myers, Brock Bowers, Zamir White. I mean, there's 4 guys who are going like decently high in drafts. But again, Aiden O'Connell, Gardner Minshew at QB, how much can they support? Looking into the Raiders, I was looking again into bottom 5 offenses in the NFL, and which is what the Raiders project to be, at least early on. Maybe O'Connell or Minshew breaks out, but how do guys on bottom 5 offenses fare? And the craziest stat that I saw, because you would think, not a great team throwing the ball out to catch up. Over the last 10 years, there's only 4 wide receivers who have been on a bottom 5 offense. That's of 50 guys. Only 4 of them have finished as a wide receiver 2 or better. And people are drafting Davante Adams as a wide receiver 1, hoping that he could finish as a wide receiver 1, let alone a wide receiver 2. So he has to break a lot of history there as being, 5 of 50 guys to actually be able to do that. And then you look at Zamir White, it's the same thing. Running backs on bottom 5 offenses tend to not be super productive. Zamir White's going as a top 20 running back. Is he going to be able to return on that ADP despite having the opportunity? Because even if they're giving the ball a ton, if he's not scoring touchdowns and he's not catching passes, which he hasn't really been a pass catcher at all in his career, where are the fantasy points coming from?
It's fair. It's a good point. All right, we'll wrap it up with the Washington Commanders. Not only do they have a new quarterback, Jayden Daniels, who I love for fantasy, other than your point about rookie quarterbacks are tough, but with production with guys around them. But I just love the value of Jayden Daniels, where you can draft him at the moment. I think he's going to rise, though. I think the hype train, once we start seeing him in preseason, a training camp, and that kind of thing. Guys, he won the Heisman. Like, this guy's legit. What are we doing? He's a little undervalued at the moment. But then they get Dan Quinn. So to me, there's a positivity with Washington. And so of all these teams, I actually lean toward Washington being the most likely team to be like Houston as far as the overachieving, somewhat out of nowhere with a rookie quarterback, they rise. So I mentioned kind of some thoughts on Brian Robinson. I like drafting him. Even Austin Eckler at the right price. Terry McLaurin. I started thinking about Jahan Dotson a little bit too. I'm kind of intrigued with him as sort of a post hype. We saw it 2 years ago, what he's capable of. And because I started thinking about, okay, a couple years ago, Nico Collins started playing really well at the end of the season for Houston. They were playing with Davis Mills. And so I was like, what wide receiver is similar to that, where they were on a bad team, maybe even a bad quarterback, but they were still putting up pretty good numbers. What if they get a new quarterback and they change? Jahan Dotson is that guy for me. And so I think he's got the opportunity to be a big time producer for the Commanders. And so I don't think people are talking about him quite at all. He might even be going undrafted in certain leagues. So I've been doing some mocks here and there, but anyway, he's a name to consider. Look at some of his numbers. Keep track of him in training camp. McLaurin, same with McLaurin. I think you get him a slight discount just because he's been in Washington and some inconsistency, but he's a talented guy out of Ohio State. Like he's a legit receiver, still in the prime of his career. And so again, Jayden Daniels coming in. I like him. What about you? You got some Washington love for sure.
Oh yeah, I'm a little biased, but I think Jayden Daniels is actually the best draft pick QB wise, the best QB pick that you can make in fantasy, because where he's going right now, I think he has an extremely high floor, but also the upside is unbelievable as well. And I think the only stat you need to look at with Jayden Daniels is over the last 20 years in the NFL, every single QB to have 100 rush attempts or more at the end of the season has finished as a top 12 fantasy QB, which is just unbelievable to me. Even guys like Tyrod Taylor in 2015 were a QB1 in fantasy just because of their rushing volume. And that 100 attempt mark is one that Daniels will certainly hit. That's only 6 attempts per game. And we've seen guys like Anthony Richardson, Jalen Hurts, Justin Fields over the last few years not be great passers early in their career, but still give you, league winning weeks because of the rushing upside. And I actually think of those 3 guys I just mentioned, Daniels is probably the best passer coming into the NFL of the 3. Like you said, he won the Heisman last year. He's 24 years old already, 5 years of starting experience in college, over 12,000 yards passing in college. I think he's less like an Anthony Richardson and much more like a Kyler Murray, who was a top 10 fantasy QB, his rookie season, and then his sophomore and junior year seasons as well for fantasy before he got injured. And also, speaking of Kyler Murray, he now has Kyler Murray's Kyler Murray's head coach, his now offensive coordinator, Cliff Kingsbury, coming in to call the plays. He has Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Austin Eckler. This is a great cast of weapons around him. Like you said, going late in drafts, he's being drafted as the QB 14 right now. If pretty much all he has to do is stay healthy and he'll be a top 12, top 10 QB, I mean, that's a fantastic pick, because if he gets hurt, then you just don't put him in your lineup. But it's not like drafting a guy like Tua, late, where, is he going to throw for 3 touchdowns this week versus, is Raheem Mostert going to get the 3 touchdowns this week? What do we do? You have a pretty safe floor that as long as Jayden Daniels is on the field, he will be a top 10 fantasy QB this season.
I like it. So we're in on Washington. And to Harrison's point, when we started this segment, it's hard to have 2 top receivers, but you're drafting Jahan Dotson. He could be, but you're drafting him so late that it's worth a flyer. The potential is there. And so, yeah. So anyway, I would encourage you to highly consider him as a late round flyer. I think the potential is there to potentially, let's say, be a wide receiver 3 on your fantasy team. That's sort of the ceiling for him.
Because Jahan Dotson, if you're drafting him in the last round of your drafts, he doesn't have to finish as a top 30 wide receiver to be a good pick. He could finish as the wide receiver 40, wide receiver 4 on your team. That's a great pick getting him in the last round. Where you need to be careful is, the guys who you're taking with the expectations of them starting in your lineup, because that probably won't end up happening. But guys could certainly go from, being end of the bench to moving up.
That's right. That's where we're looking for value, looking for potential, sleepers. And so as the offseason goes on, we will continue to talk more about those kind of guys that we're targeting, late in drafts and guys that can surprise, but they won't surprise you because you'll be all over it. So we'll talk about that in the coming weeks. Harrison, great insight from you today. This was a fun one as always. He's Harrison Zuckerberg. I'm Bryce. Thanks to our producer, Aaron. Encourage you to check out fantasyfootballfellowship.com. Become a free member today. Get access to all of our content all season long. Get your league involved as well and play fantasy football with purpose. I'm Bryce. I'm a sports fan who follows Jesus. I believe in the good news that he died on the cross for my sin. He was resurrected, and through faith, I've been saved by his grace. I hope that is true for you as well, and I hope you'll join me as we live life as sports fans and fantasy managers who follow Jesus together. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you next time right here on the Fantasy Football Fellowship Podcast.